Towards a Sustainable Circular Economy is a project that, together with my co-PI, Stefanie Hellwig, we endeavor in the next couple of years. And the main question that we are after is to try to understand whether and how a circular economy can be beneficial for Switzerland. So if we go, as Gunther Stephan said, if we go from a linear value chain to a circular value chain, is that helpful in any way towards sustainability? And if so, how can we do it? That is kind of the overarching question. Now, I like to illustrate that with an easy example. There are at least 3 pairs of sports shoes in this room. So if you look at your feet and you're finding sports shoes, then you are one of the at least 3 people. I didn't look around, but I accidentally spotted 3 people. Why do I say that? Because in the world, there are roughly 3 billion of pairs of sports shoes produced every year. Quite a number. Now, what happens to these sports shoes after they are worn out? Depending on the country they are in, they're either landfilled or incinerated. Now, if you think about a circular economy, and I'm not saying this is the prominent example that we'll look into for 4 years, obviously not, but if you look at that from a sustainability, circular economy standpoint, then the first question is, how could you do it differently? How would a non-linear, circular value chain for sports shoes look like? Now, come up with a couple of ideas how to do that. Second question, if you have these ideas, how do you evaluate them? How can you say that one way is, in terms of sustainability, and we all know that's difficult to assess, but how can you say one way is better than the other way? Now, thirdly, if you have identified one of your 5, 6 ways as the best way, or as a better way at least than the current way, how do you make the economic system work in such a way that you actually make a transition to that circular value chain? How do you incentivize actors, that keyword already occurred this morning, to actually change their behavior? How is that happening? And I'm not using this example because I saw the 3 people with sports shoes on their feet today, but because we were in a way lucky that we were part of a workshop of one of the very large sports shoe manufacturers in the world, and they are thinking about that. So they were very much active and, okay, how can we do it, et cetera, et cetera. And all these questions came up, and so that's why I thought I use that example as an introduction. This is how we set up the project. It's in 3 phases. First phase is status quo analysis. Second phase is the actual analysis of individual value chains. And third phase is a recommendation phase. And we do that in 2 perspectives, and that's one of the contributions of the project, that we unite a resource perspective, which Stefanie Hellwig is leading, and a socioeconomic / management perspective, which is our group at ETH. And in the status quo analysis, we'll first look at Switzerland and different value chains in Switzerland. How can resource flows be mapped in Switzerland? So what are white spots where we don't have any information yet, and how can we do the actual flow mapping? From a resource perspective, socioeconomic perspective, we'll look at individual cases of past projects where a linear chain has already been circularized. And we will look at barriers and drivers, how that was possible. So learning from past experience, also from companies. Based on that, we will choose 1, 2, or 3 particular value chains that we will analyze in much more detail together with companies. And for these 1 to 3 value chains that we will share in the 2 perspectives, we will essentially do what I just exemplified with the sports shoe. So first, identify different alternatives, how you could close the value chain and make it circular. Secondly, resource perspective, try to understand what are indicators and how to evaluate these circular flows. Thirdly, on the right, on the socioeconomic perspective, understand the mechanisms from a economic / management standpoint, how this change can actually happen. Because in that change, obviously, some companies will win and some companies will lose, and there will be obstructors and there will be companies who push, etc. So how can we analyze that and the mechanisms behind that before we close with recommendations for policymakers and for companies? I do think that I'm close to the ging, so I jump to this one. I only talked about sport shoes yet, and that is because the first phase will be across the board and look at a large number of value chains, because we need to map the resource flows first. Now here's 4 examples that we think we can look into in the actual second phase. Additives, chemical additives that can either prohibit making a value chain circular, or enable a value chain to become circular. Secondly, solvents, a large resource flow within Switzerland, chemical, pharmaceutical industry. Insulation material, very interesting because it's hard to make circular, and there is a large amount of insulation materials that will become, let's call it, available in the next couple of days, couple of years, when a wave of buildings is being deconstructed. And lastly, plastic packaging will be another potential value chain that we look at. My last 20 seconds go on the Circularity Lab, which is an idea where we will try to work together with companies in a kind of co-lab space in order to actually make the change happen. And now I stop before you hear the gong. Thank you very much.